Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our regular updates from Congress. What is dominating the interest in the Senate is the continued focus on this big, I think, awful, and in many ways just plain cruel Republican bill. Let me remind you, we continue to get new updates on how many Virginians will be affected. Latest estimates are that about 300,000 Virginians will lose their health care, either by directly losing their Medicaid benefits or won't be able to pay for their ability to purchase health care through the open exchange that's been set up since Obamacare. 300,000 Virginians losing their health care. And remember, in many rural communities, this will also mean a dramatic shutdown of services, because without those Medicaid patients, hospitals will have to shut down services, particularly OBGYN, and it's going to be devastating. There's just no question. We've made huge progress on at least coverage on health care. Now to take this giant step backwards would be a disaster. In addition, Virginia would see about 200,000 folks lose food assistance benefits, SNAP benefits. On top of that, there are estimates that the state costs of these programs will go up a couple $100 million minimum. So again, a double whammy. Do we really want to cut kids' school breakfasts and school lunches? I mean, this bill is so cruel that it even goes in another part and cuts assistance to food banks. You're not going to balance the budget on cutting money to food banks at the same time that you're cutting kids' healthy breakfasts. I think much of the other activities from Trump is an effort to try to distract attention from this awful bill. And again, I think it's cruel because in many ways what it does is it cuts these programs. It actually raises taxes for people who make minimum wage. And for those at the very top, the top tenth of 1%, get about a $400,000 tax break. That's just not the kind of sense of fairness that ought to be coming out of our government. And I think my Republican friends are doing everything they can to distract attention from this piece of legislation. The more Virginians know about it, the more Americans know about it, the worse it appears. On another subject, we put forward legislation to try to deal with the air traffic control and airspace. We all know what happened at National earlier in the year. We lost 67 lives with the plane crash. This Fair Airspaces Act of 2025 would make sure places like National that we have better coordination between National and the military. Remember, this was a military helicopter that crashed into a commercial plane. It would also take on long overdue renewals of FAA safety standards, shortages in air traffic controllers, and other system improvements. We've got to make sure that traveling in the airspace of America is safe and secure. And right now, people question that. We've saw this challenges at National and then followed by challenges at Newark Airport. And it is bad for the economy, bad for tourism, bad for people's just plain mental psyche if you don't feel your air control and air traffic is safe. And I've had a lot of folks raise those concerns about flying out of National recently. On a third item that's not gotten as much attention, but I am very worried by the increasing politicization of our intelligence community. We've recently seen the FBI remove for political purposes a senior FBI officers in Richmond and a senior officer in Norfolk. More particularly in the intelligence community, Director Gabbard recently, without going through appropriate procedures, fired part of the support team for the Inspector General. The Inspector General is supposed to be independent, and ended up putting in her own choice as the deputy counsel to the Inspector General. The whole notion of the Inspector General is you're supposed to be independent from the political appointees like Director Gabbard. I think Director Gabbard is way over her head. I don't think she's qualified or has the judgment to have this position. This is, remember, the individual who couldn't call Eric Snowden a traitor and is now directing our National Intelligence Service. And on top of that, recently her chief of staff, who I'm trying to prevent from getting another position, literally we have evidence of him trying to convert and change an independent intelligence assessment. And then when the intelligence professional wouldn't make those changes, we're fired. And I've already been asked by some of our major intelligence partners around the world, hey, what's going on? What is happening to American intelligence? And we are made less safe by these actions. We are made less secure. We see those images at the same time we see Donald Trump trying to politicize the military, whether it be through the actions that speech yesterday that was a campaign speech at Fort Bragg, or deploying Marines to Los Angeles over the objection of the governor, or this parade this weekend in D.C. that's going to probably cost the taxpayer about $45 million, a parade that would be more appropriate for Moscow than Washington. So this politicization of the military, this denying the independence of the intelligence community, all these are items that, again, make us less safe in this country. So why don't I stop there, Laura, and turn it over to you for questions.
Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks a lot for joining us. Following up on the issue you just touched on, the politicization of the military, what concerns, if any, do you have about with the fact that many of these protests have spread to other cities? Are you concerned at all that the military might be called on to be deployed in other cities across the country, and that this could be a growing phenomenon?
I mean, Mitchell, we'll see. I mean, I think Americans, when they see some of these images of people being grabbed off the street, I know the fear in the immigrant community in Northern Virginia right now is palatable. I've been meeting with faith leaders of a number of denominations to say, how do you make sure your congregations are safe? On the other hand, violence is never acceptable. And the scenes of burning cars or looting, it is appropriate that the mayor put a curfew in place in Los Angeles. And my fear, though, is that Trump is trying to be almost provocative on this issue. I was a governor. I had to call up the National Guard a number of times for emergencies. But the idea that you're somehow doing it over, not even consulting the governor or going over the governor, which is what Trump has done in the case of California, and then calling in literally the U.S. military, the Marines, is extraordinarily concerning. I hope that we can see what Trump had promised was securing the border and then going after hardened criminals that had overstayed. That is different than what we're seeing with some of these raids, where literally folks going to school, folks going to get health care, and I fear if we start to see ICE agents start to go at churches or mosques or houses of worship. That is not, I think, what Americans signed up for.
Senator, our next question is Tom Fitzgerald with Fox 5. Tom? Okay, we're going to move on to Ethan Krause with Wavy News.
Yep. Good morning, Senator. Thanks for taking our questions. My question is touching on taxes for Virginians. So both candidates for governor have expressed their desire to end the Virginia car tax. What is your take on this, and how do you think the elimination of this tax would affect localities and Virginians as a whole?
Well, you may recall that my predecessor as governor got elected in many ways on going against the car tax. The problem was there was no mechanism to fill in the hole, and Virginia was left when I was governor with close to $6 billion shortfall. We had to close that. I understand that the car tax is not a popular tax at all, but whomever is elected governor, and I hope it's Abigail Spanberger, you got to wrestle through a way to deal with that doesn't leave the localities holding the bag, because it's localities who pick up most of the cost, for example, of your local police department or your local school divisions. So this has been a goal of lots of folks in Virginia for years, how to do it in a way that doesn't leave your local county or local city or towns holding the fiscal bag is where you got to get the math right.
Senator, our next question is Avery Davis with 29 News.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for speaking with us today. There's been some reporting that there are 13 sheriffs in Virginia, 13 different jurisdictions, who have signed agreements with ICE to comply on some level with their immigration enforcement, one of those being Greene County in our market. And I'm curious to hear your reaction to this, whether you think it is the place of local law enforcement to partner up with national immigration enforcement.
Listen, I think most of the law enforcement I talk to feel that their job of law enforcement is very separate from the responsibilities of immigration enforcement. Matter of fact, law enforcement officials that I talk to are concerned oftentimes, if they get too affiliated with ICE, that members of the community won't trust them then, and you could actually see crime go up. But I'm not going to weigh in. When some communities where sheriffs have affirmatively decided not to work with, other communities they have worked with, that is up to local law enforcement. My job at the federal level is to make sure that we oversee ICE, we oversee immigration procedures. We recognize I'm all in on making sure that folks who've broken the law need to be deported. I have some real questions, though, about some of these sweeps where we're finding literally kids on the way to school getting picked up, and I'm not sure that's what Americans signed up for.
Senator, our next question is Gennaro Busey with 13 News Now.
Hey, Senator. Connor Reel standing in for Gennaro. Thanks for taking the time. I know this is very specific, but with all the time that you've spent in Hampton Roads and the amount of time you've spent working with our military here specifically, we had a 21-year-old soldier who disappeared, Angelina Resendez. Yesterday, we got news that her body was recovered, and there's still a lot of questions around the case, but I'm wondering your thoughts when you hear about a tragedy like this.
Well, it's heartbreaking, and my condolences go out to the family. I know the family's called on me and Tim Kaine and the president and others to investigate what happened and why was this soldier allowed. She was basically, I think they were disappeared for a number of days before it was reported. I think the family is owed a thorough investigation. And it also raises back to the question of the failure to have an alert system in place that we worked on in Virginia for a number of years for folks who are not kids or not seniors, and I believe this individual was 21, so she fit in that category of. I'm not sure why the alert systems were not notified, whether the military didn't notify the family to alert the alert system. So I'm not sure of all of, let me not get too deep into the details because I don't know the details, but I do think it is important that we get a thorough investigation of what happened, and if there was anybody dropping the ball on the timeliness of letting the family know that the soldier had disappeared, then that needs to be corrected.
Is Erica Craven with WTKR.
Thanks, Senator. I actually had the same question. So I just wanted to ask if you had anything else to say about the missing sailor, Angelina.
Other than the fact that it, and I'm having was it Amber, Rachel? Ashanti. No. It brings me back to in so many ways, the memory of Ashanti Billy, who had gone missing in Hampton Roads for a number of days, and then unfortunately was discovered killed. And we put forward at both the state level and at the national level the Ashanti Alert that would have, filled in that alert system for between 25 and 65-year-olds. I didn't realize. I believe this sailor was 21 years old, and so I do have questions whether the Ashanti Alert system was put into action, or whether there had been what the time lag was between the family being notified she was missing and the military notifying the family of that. But that's why we need this investigation. I have questions, but I believe a thorough investigation would provide those answers to the family. And if there are gaps in the system, we need to get them filled.
Senator, that was our final question.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much.